The snow fell in thick, relentless sheets outside the Silver Pine Tavern, blanketing the streets of Winterford in a white silence that made everything feel distant and muffled. I pushed open the heavy wooden door, the warm air inside hitting me like a welcome embrace after the biting cold. The place was packed tonight, with the festival of the winter solstice drawing in travelers and locals alike. Laughter mixed with the crackle of the massive hearth fire, and the scent of spiced ale and roasted meat hung heavy in the air. Strings of pine boughs and silver bells decorated the beams overhead, their soft chimes lost beneath the murmur of voices. I had not wanted to come. My friend Tomas had practically dragged me here, insisting it was time I stopped hiding in my workshop like some recluse. "She's a good one," he had said. "Name's Arvina Stonebrook. Wears a green cloak, black hair sitting near the window. You'll know her when you see her." I had argued, but in the end I had put on my cleanest dark green wool tunic, tucked a small dried winter rose into my pocket as a pointless gesture of politeness, and walked through the storm. I scanned the room. There, by the frost-laced window, sat a woman in a deep green cloak, her black hair falling loose over one shoulder. She was alone, staring into her cup with an expression that looked both weary and gentle, an orc, tall and broad-shouldered like all of her kind, but there was nothing fierce in the way she sat. She matched Tomas's description perfectly. My heart gave a nervous thud, but I crossed the room anyway. I stopped beside the table. "I'm sorry if I'm late," I said, my voice rough from disuse. The snow made the road slower than I expected. She looked up, surprise flickering across her face for the briefest moment. Then she smiled, small and warm, and gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Please sit. The storm is no one's fault tonight." I sat. The conversation started awkwardly, the way all first meetings do, but it did not stay that way. She asked about my work as a carpenter and woodworker in the small shop I ran on the edge of town. I told her about the doors and tables and wagon wheels I built, about the satisfaction of shaping raw timber into something useful. She listened with real interest, her golden eyes steady. In return, she spoke of the northern mountains where she had grown up, how she loved the sound of snow crunching underfoot and the crackle of wood in a hearth on long winter nights. Her voice was low and calm, carrying the faint accent of the high clans. Somehow, without meaning to, I found myself speaking of things I rarely shared with anyone. The long, quiet years I had spent keeping to myself. The way winter always felt heavier than other seasons, pressing down with memories I could not quite name. She did not offer empty comfort or pitying looks. She simply listened, nodding once or twice as if she understood the weight of unspoken loss better than most. For 20 minutes, the world outside the window ceased to exist. The fire warmed my back, the ale warmed my throat, and for the first time in longer than I cared to admit, I felt the tight knot inside my chest loosen just a fraction. Then a serving boy hurried over and whispered something urgent in her ear. Her expression changed instantly. She stood, the chair scraping back against the wooden floor. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, already reaching for her cloak. "I have to go, forgive me." Before I could reply, she turned and slipped through the side door that led toward the kitchens and the back alley. I sat there, stunned, staring at the empty seat across from me. The mug in my hands had gone lukewarm. The easy warmth of the last 20 minutes drained away, replaced by a familiar, hollow feeling. She had regretted it. Of course she had. I had talked too much, revealed too much, shown myself to be exactly the quiet, burdened man everyone in Winterford already knew I was. She had simply found a polite way to escape. A young serving girl approached the table a few moments later, wiping her hands on her apron. "Sir, are you still waiting for Arvina Stonebrook?" The name hit me like cold water. I looked up, confused. "Yes, that's who I'm meeting." The girl's eyes widened with understanding. "Oh, then I'm afraid there's been a mix-up. Arvina sent word just now. Her sleigh overturned on the mountain road. The storm caught her hard. She's walking the rest of the way and will be late, but she asked us to tell you to please wait. She's determined to come." I stared at her. The pieces clicked into place with humiliating clarity. The woman in the green cloak, the easy conversation, the sudden departure. It had not been Arvina at all. I had sat down at the wrong table and poured out pieces of my life to a complete stranger. Heat flooded my face. I stood abruptly, grabbing my own cloak from the back of the chair. This was mortifying. I had to leave before the real Arvina arrived and discovered what a fool I had made of myself. The serving girl touched my arm lightly. "The storm's still raging outside, sir. Arvina was very clear. She said to make sure you waited. She'll be here." I looked toward the front door. Snow whipped against the glass pane so thickly it was impossible to see more than a few feet. My workshop was a cold, empty walk away. I thought of the long night ahead if I left now, sitting alone with nothing but my own embarrassment for company. Then I thought of the woman who had just left, how she had listened without judgment, how for a short while the weight on my shoulders had felt lighter. I sat back down. I was not waiting because I believed the real Arvina would still want to meet me. I was waiting because for the first time in years, I wanted to see what happened if I stayed instead of running. Nearly an hour passed. The tavern slowly emptied as the storm worsened, and patrons decided the warmth of their own hearths was worth braving the wind. I nursed another mug of ale and tried not to replay every word I had said to the wrong woman. Then the front door burst open with a howl of wind. Snow swirled in, flakes dancing wildly in the firelight. A tall orc woman stepped inside, her green cloak heavy with ice, her black hair wet and plastered to her face. Her cheeks were flushed red from the cold, her breathing ragged as though she had run the last stretch. Snow still clung to her boots and the hem of her cloak. She scanned the room, her golden eyes landing on me. She crossed the floor in long, purposeful strides and stopped at my table. "I'm so sorry I'm late," she said, voice rough from the cold but steady. The sleigh broke down halfway up the pass. I walked the rest. "My name is Arvina Stonebrook. I'm the one you were supposed to meet tonight." The orc woman stood before me, snow still melting from the edges of her cloak and dripping onto the wooden floorboards. She was taller than I had expected, broad-shouldered and strong, with pale green skin that glowed faintly in the firelight. Her golden eyes were bright, despite the exhaustion etched across her face. Strands of wet black hair clung to her cheeks, and the hem of her cloak was torn where it had caught on rocks or branches during her long walk. Her boots were caked with mud and ice. She looked as if the storm had tried its best to keep her away and had failed. "I'm Arvina Stonebrook," she repeated, her voice low and steady even though her shoulders trembled from the cold. "I'm so sorry." The sleigh axle snapped halfway up the mountain pass. The horse panicked when the thundersnow started. The driver could only take me so far before the road became impossible. I walked the rest of the way because I gave my word I would be here. I stood up so quickly the chair scraped back. "Please," I said, pulling out the seat across from me. "Sit. You're freezing." She hesitated, still breathing hard. "You have every right to leave. I made you wait far too long in this weather. I would understand if—" "Sit," I repeated, softer this time. I raised a hand toward the nearest serving girl. "Hot cider, a blanket, and whatever soup is ready. Quickly, please." Arvina lowered herself into the chair, wincing slightly as the warmth of the room touched her chilled skin. The serving girl returned moments later with a thick wool blanket, a steaming mug of spiced apple cider, and a bowl of thick venison stew. Arvina wrapped the blanket around her shoulders with a grateful nod, then cupped the mug between her large hands as if drawing life from its heat. I sat down again, studying her. "A person who walks through a blizzard just to keep a promise deserves to be waited for," I said. She looked up at me then. For the first time since she had entered the tavern, a real smile touched her lips. Small, tired, but genuine. It reached her golden eyes and made something tight in my chest ease. Before either of us could speak again, the side door opened, and the orc woman from earlier, the one I had mistaken for Arvina, stepped back into the main room. She carried a fresh cloth and another cup of hot water. Her name, I now remembered the serving girl saying, was Mira. She placed the items in front of Arvina with a knowing look, then glanced at me. "Looks like your real date finally arrived," Mira said, her voice light with gentle teasing. "I tried to keep him from bolting while you were out in that storm." Arvena's eyebrows rose. She looked from Mira to me. "Bolting?" Mira grinned. "He thought you were already here, sat down, had a whole conversation, then you left through the back. Turns out he was at the wrong table the entire time." I felt my face burn. I stared into my own mug, wishing the floor would swallow me. Arvina stared at me for a heartbeat, then burst into quiet laughter. It was not mocking. It was warm, surprised, and unexpectedly kind. If I had seen someone sitting exactly where I was told to look, wearing the right colors, I might have made the same mistake, she said. I'm sorry you had to explain yourself to a stranger because of me. The tension in my shoulders loosened again. We started over, the conversation slower this time, more careful. At first it felt awkward, like stepping onto ice that might crack. She mentioned that Tomas had told her I was a man of few words. I answered that Tomas had said far too little about her stubbornness. She laughed again. Walking through a blizzard is not stubbornness, it is honor. I gave my word I would meet you, so I came. That single sentence stayed with me. For her, this meeting was not simply a casual evening, it was a promise kept. We talked deeper as the tavern grew quieter around us. Arvena told me how her parents had died years ago during a harsh season of sickness in the northern clans. Since then, she had raised her younger sister Leora alone, making every choice with her sister's future in mind. Her voice never wavered, but I heard the weight she carried. I spoke of my own quiet years in Winterford, of the way I had grown used to solitude, of how winter always pressed heavier on me than other seasons. She listened without offering easy comfort. Instead, she said, "Those we have lost do not need us to stop living in order to prove we cared." The words settled between us like something solid and true. We stayed until the tavern keeper began snuffing candles and the last musicians packed away their instruments. Outside, the storm had eased into a gentle snowfall. Arvena asked about my workshop. I asked about Leora. When I learned the girl was talented with patterns and carvings but smiled less these days, I heard myself say, "If you wish, bring her to my workshop tomorrow. I have scraps of good wood left over. We could make a few decorations for the solstice." Arvena looked at me as though I had offered something far more valuable than wood. She agreed. I hired a sleigh to take her back to the small lodging house where she and Leora were staying. The horse's hooves crunched softly through fresh snow as we rode in silence. When we reached the door, Arvena paused before stepping down. "Thank you for waiting," she said. "Thank you for coming," I answered. She disappeared inside. I remained seated in the sleigh a moment longer, watching the lamplight flicker behind the window. For the first time in longer than I could remember, the thought of tomorrow did not feel like another long, empty stretch of winter. It felt like something worth waking up for. The next afternoon, the sky had cleared somewhat, though a fresh layer of snow still covered the rooftops of Winterford. I was in my workshop behind the house, the familiar scent of pine and freshly cut wood filling the air, when I heard footsteps crunching outside. I wiped my hands on my apron and stepped toward the door just as Arvena and a younger orc girl appeared. Arvena smiled when she saw me. "I hope we're not disturbing you. This is my sister, Leora." Leora was 17, tall for her age, but still carrying the slender build of youth. Her pale green skin was a shade lighter than her sister's, and her golden eyes were watchful, almost wary, as if she were afraid of taking up too much space. She stood half a step behind Arvena, hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Not at all," I said, opening the door wider. "Come in. It's warmer inside." The workshop was modest but well organized. Tools hung neatly on the walls, a small charcoal stove glowed in the corner, and the long workbench was covered with scraps of good timber I had set aside. I had prepared everything the night before: safe carving knives with rounded handles, sheets of sandpaper, small pots of mineral pigment, and lengths of strong twine for hanging decorations. At first, Leora stayed close to her sister, eyes scanning the room with quiet curiosity. But when I showed her the small pieces of wood, some shaped like stars, others rough outlines of birds and leaves, something shifted. Her fingers twitched. She reached out hesitantly and picked up a piece of pine. "You can carve whatever you like," I told her gently. "These are just scraps. They're meant to become something new." I demonstrated how to hold the knife safely, how to sand the edges smooth. Leora watched intently, then began to work. Her movements were careful and precise. What started as shy attempts soon became focused, almost meditative. She carved a delicate bird, its wings slightly spread as if ready to take flight. Arvena stood nearby, arms crossed, watching her sister. At one point she leaned close to me and whispered, "It's been a long time since I've seen her so absorbed in something that doesn't feel like a burden." While Leora worked, Arvena and I moved to the other end of the bench to cut larger pieces for simple wall hangings. Our shoulders brushed occasionally as we worked side by side. Neither of us pulled away. The silence between us was comfortable, broken only by the soft scrape of saw and knife. "You often help strangers like this?" Arvena asked after a while, her voice low. I paused, considering the question. No, I admitted, but you don't feel like a stranger. She looked at me then, golden eyes steady. A small, warm smile touched her lips. The air in the workshop felt noticeably warmer than the stove could account for. When Leora finished her bird, we gathered all the pieces and decorated a small pine branch I had set up in the corner of the workshop. We hung the carved stars, leaves, and Leora's bird with twine. The little tree glowed in the soft light from the stove, simple but beautiful. Leora stepped back and said quietly, "This one is the way home." Arvena turned her face away for a moment. I caught the glint of moisture in her eyes before she wiped it discreetly. For the first time, she was seeing her sister, not as someone she had to protect, but as a young woman finding joy again. The following day, Arvena invited me to their small lodging room for honey cakes. The room was modest, bare wooden walls, few furnishings, but spotlessly clean and surprisingly warm. A few embroidered cloths hung on the walls, bright splashes of color in the simple space. Leora had tried her hand at baking, and though one corner of the cake was slightly burnt, we laughed about it together as we ate at the tiny table. Over the cakes and warm tea, the conversation flowed more easily. Arvena spoke of how she had once dreamed of becoming a scribe, recording histories and letters for the clans, but after their parents died, she had set that dream aside to work and raise Leora. There was no bitterness in her voice, only quiet acceptance. I told her how I had once considered leaving Winterford entirely, how every street and season seemed to carry memories that made staying feel heavy. She looked at me across the small table. "Why did you stay?" I thought for a moment. Perhaps because I hadn't yet found the right reason to leave. Arvena's gaze softened. Or the right reason to stay. In the days that followed, we saw each other more often. We walked together through the winter market, colorful stalls bright against the snow. We took Leora to see the lantern procession one evening, the glowing lights reflecting in her eyes. One afternoon, we helped an elderly widow repair her leaking roof, working side by side in the cold air until the job was done. The feelings between us grew slowly, quietly, like roots taking hold beneath frozen ground. I did not yet dare call it love. Arvena said nothing that named it either, but every time she appeared at the door of my workshop, cheeks flushed from the cold and a small smile on her lips, the long winter felt noticeably less harsh. The morning after our visit to the lodging house, I was sanding a fresh oak plank in the workshop when Arvena appeared at the door, a sealed letter clutched tightly in her hand. Snow still dusted her cloak from the short walk across town. Her face was pale, and her golden eyes held a storm of their own. She stepped inside without speaking at first, the cold air following her. I set down the sandpaper and waited. Finally, she held the letter out. "It came from Sunspire," she said, "a merchant's guild. They need someone reliable to keep their ledgers and records. The pay is more than I have ever seen in one place. Enough to send Leora to the weaving academy there, proper training, a future. But we would have to leave Winterford in 7 days. 7 days." The words landed like a weight on my chest. I stared at the letter, then at her. I wanted to say 1,000 things. Don't go. Stay. I'm only just learning how to look forward to mornings again. But the words would not come. She had already given up so much for her sister. I had no right to ask her to give up this chance too. "If it is what's best for Leora," I said instead, my voice quieter than I intended, "then you should consider it." Arvena looked at me for a long moment. Something sad flickered across her face. "I knew you would say that," she whispered. She left soon after, the letter still in her hand. The workshop felt colder once she was gone. That night, long after the lanterns had been lit and the town had gone quiet, a soft knock sounded at the workshop door. I opened it to find Leora standing there alone, cloak pulled tight around her shoulders, eyes red from crying. "I'm sorry to come so late," she said. I didn't know where else to go." I led her inside and closed the door against the wind. She stood near the stove, twisting her hands. "I received a letter too," she said, pulling a folded paper from her pocket, "from the weaving workshop right here in Winterford. They saw the patterns I made at the market last week. They offered me an apprenticeship. Room, board, and training. I could stay." She looked down at the letter, voice cracking. "I hid it from Arvena. She has sacrificed everything for me since our parents died. I didn't want her to refuse the Sunspire offer just because of me. But I don't want to go south. I don't want her to leave the one place that finally makes her smile again. Tears slipped down her cheeks. She deserves to choose for herself, not just for me. I stared at the letter in her hands. 2 sisters, each trying so hard to protect the other that neither one asked what the other truly wanted. The realization settled heavy in my gut. Before I could answer, the wind outside rose to a howl. A urgent knocking came at the front of the house. Tomas's voice half-shouted against the storm. "Ewan, open up! The old pass! There's a caravan of children trapped up there. My daughter is with them. The blizzard came back worse than anyone expected. We need every able hand with ropes and sleds." My blood turned to ice. Memories of winter's cruelty flooded back. The long nights, the helplessness, the way the cold could swallow everything. My hands began to shake. I could not move toward the door. Tomas pounded again. "Ewan!" I sent a hurried message with one of the boys who had come with Tomas. A single line scrawled on a scrap of paper. "I cannot do this. I am trapped again in that night." Minutes later, the workshop door flew open. Arvena stood there, cloak already dusted white, breathing hard from running through the storm. She crossed the room in 3 strides and took my hands in hers. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was steady. "I got your message," she said. "I'm going with you." I tried to pull away. "The pass is dangerous, the wind, the drifts." "Yes," she cut in, eyes fierce. "That is exactly why no one should go alone." Her words broke through the fear like an axe through ice. I nodded once. We gathered ropes, lanterns, and 2 sturdy sleds from the back of the workshop. Tomas and a handful of other men from town joined us. Arvena took the lead without being asked, her strong shoulders pulling one sled through the deepening snow while I walked beside her, testing the ground with a long staff, searching for the old safe path I had used many times to haul timber. The wind screamed. Snow stung our faces. Twice the sled nearly overturned in hidden drifts. Each time Arvena braced her weight and kept it upright. I kept my eyes on the faint trail markers half buried in white. My heart hammered, but her presence at my side kept the old panic from swallowing me whole. We found the caravan just before midnight. Overturned sleds, children huddled together under blankets already stiff with ice. Tomas's daughter was among them, small and shivering. Arvena moved first. She lifted the youngest into her arms, speaking low and calm, her voice cutting through the wind like a promise. "We have you now. Hold on." I helped the older children onto the sleds, tying ropes around them so they would not slip. When one of the boys panicked and I felt my own breath catch, Arvena looked straight at me through the swirling snow. "Ewan," she said, loud enough only for me to hear. "Look at me. This night is different. This time you came in time." Her words anchored me. We worked together until every child was secured. The journey back down the pass was slower, harder, but we made it. By the time we reached the edge of town, the first gray light of dawn was touching the sky and the storm had finally begun to ease. The children were safe. Tomas embraced his daughter with tears in his eyes. Villagers rushed forward with blankets and hot broth. Arvena stood a little apart, breathing hard, snow melting in her hair. She had walked through one blizzard to keep a simple promise, and now she had walked through another to stand beside me when I needed her most. In that moment, watching her, I understood something with perfect clarity. She was not just the woman who had arrived late to a tavern table. She was the one who stayed when the storm came. And I did not want her to leave Winterford without knowing the truth. I loved her. The next morning, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, casting a pale light over the snow-covered streets of Winterford. I walked to the lodging house with Leora's apprenticeship letter tucked safely inside my coat. My heart beat faster with every step. Arvena opened the door when I knocked. She was packing, folding clothes into a travel bag with careful, deliberate movements. Leora sat on the edge of the bed, eyes red from crying. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. Without a word, I took the letter from my coat and placed it on the small table between them. Arvena froze, staring at the paper. She recognized the seal of the Winterford weaving workshop immediately. Her hand trembled as she picked it up and read. Leora's voice broke the silence. "I received it last week. They offered me an apprenticeship, room, board, everything. I hid it from you because I didn't want you to turn down the Sunspire offer. You've given up so much for me already." Arvena's face went through a storm of emotions. Shock, hurt, anger. "You hid this from me, after everything I've done to give you a better life." The 2 sisters argued then, voices rising in the small room. Tears flowed. Accusations and love tangled together until, finally, Arvena pulled Leora into her arms. They held each other tightly, sobbing. When they separated, Arvena looked at her sister with new understanding. You don't need me to sacrifice anymore. You need me to live for myself, too. I waited until the room grew quiet again. Then I spoke directly to Arvena. I don't want you to stay because I need you, I said. I want you to stay only if staying is what you truly want. I took a breath. My workshop is growing. I need someone who can manage the ledgers, keep records, handle transactions with merchants. It's real work, not charity. The pay would be enough for both of you to live comfortably here in Winterford. Leora could take the apprenticeship she actually wants. Arvena looked at me, golden eyes searching. Are you sure this isn't just because you don't want to lose me? I met her gaze without flinching. I don't want to lose you, but I also don't want to hold you here out of pity or guilt. The choice has to be yours. She was silent for a long time, staring at the letter on the table, then at her sister, then at me. The weight of years of sacrifice seemed to settle on her shoulders one last time. Finally she spoke, her voice steady. I walked through a blizzard to keep a promise to a stranger. Now I want to stay to keep a promise to myself. She chose to stay. That evening, we returned to the Silver Pine Tavern. We sat at the exact same table where I had waited for her that first night. Mira, the manager, smiled warmly when she saw us together and brought us 2 mugs of spiced cider without being asked. I looked across the table at Arvena. The firelight danced in her golden eyes. I thought the evening had ended before you even arrived, I said. She smiled, the same warm, tired smile that had first eased something inside me. It's lucky you waited. I reached across the table and took her hand in mine. I love you. Arvena's eyes grew bright with unshed tears. She squeezed my hand. I love you too, Ewan. Slower than the blizzard, but stronger than the mountain stone. 1 year later, we held our joining ceremony right there in the Silver Pine Tavern. Tomas stood as witness, grinning like a proud father. Leora had sewn Arvena's ceremonial cloak herself, every stitch filled with love. Mira gifted us a cask of her finest winter ale. I gave Arvena a wooden ring I had carved with the image of a storm and a guiding lantern. She gave me a leather cord with a smooth bluestone, the symbol of a promise kept. The story began when I thought the meeting had ended before it started. I sat at the wrong table, bared my heart to a stranger, and nearly walked away in shame. But in the middle of a blizzard, Arvena stepped through the door, shivering and soaked, and said, I am the one you were supposed to meet. She arrived late, but she arrived right on time. She walked into my life exactly when I was ready to close the door forever, and I learned that sometimes love does not come on schedule or in the shape we expect. But if we have the courage to wait just a little longer, it can push through the storm, covered in snow, and change the rest of our lives forever.